Chapter 15, Documentation and Export Compliance. A number of exporters find documentation challenging, so it's worth pointing out there are a number of resources available for assistance with documentation. A very good one is freight forwarders. Last week we had a discussion with a freight forwarder. Um, Other sources include the Center for International Trade Development. There is one locally that's affiliated with LBCC. That's a very good resource, not just for documentation completion, but also for country research and even for distributor matchmaking. Last, there are a number of online resources, and I haven't listed them here because your book author, James Foley, does a very good job of that. Let's look at a couple of the basic documents that are needed. You may need more than this depending on the shipment, but at a minimum, you'd probably have to complete an export quotation and include a pro forma invoice, commercial invoice, packing list, EEI, bill of lading and airway bill, certificate of origin, or insurance certificate and bank draft. The export quotation is useful in that it provides the buyer, or prospective buyer, with several options showing them prices that vary depending on how much responsibility the seller will take on. And so I'm giving you an opportunity in this week's exercise to complete an export quotation worksheet for an air shipment. Um, the numbers that you'll be filling in are available in the exercise on the Moodle site. So this is just what the worksheet looks like that I put together in Google Docs. I gave you the material price and it's basically just showing you that, you add the material price to the export boxing and banking fees to get the total Ex Works price, which is what it would cost for the seller to acquire the item from your dock. And then you can see you're just adding additional charges. So total FCA airport charges are just inland freight and forwarders fees added together. These total FCA airport charges added to the Ex Works price give you the total price FCA airport. And just a reminder, when we looked at the Incoterms, we learned that you don't just say an Incoterm, but you list the Incoterm destination, so where the item will be brought to. And you can see at the bottom, the most expensive option for the buyer, where the seller is doing the most work and providing the most, is the total CIP airport price. So I'll let you go ahead and work through that. I think that will be worthwhile. The pro forma invoice allows the foreign buyer to obtain an import license if required, and they also need it to open a letter of credit. We will talk about letters of credit at greater length next week. The commercial invoice is used by the foreign government to determine the import duty, and the description of the goods has to match that on the letter of credit. As I said, we'll come back to letters of credit next week, but it's critically important that they match. If they don't, your goods could be held up potentially for weeks. It can be very, very problematic. There are country-specific requirements. The packing list is sent to the consignee to aid in checking the shipment. The EEI is now required for products that are worth $2,500 or more, and that's on an individual product basis. So even if the shipment goes over total shipment goes over $2,500, you only need to fill out the EEI on those specific items that are worth $2,500 or more. And the shipper is ultimately responsible for the content, even if the freight forwarder fills it out. Bills of lading airway bills function as a receipt for goods for the buyer and as a contract of carriage for the carrier. The COO, or certificate of origin, as I said, is required by customs in the importing country. And it may repeat information that's on the commercial invoice, but it's critically important in its own right because there are a number of trade agreements that reduce or eliminate tariffs between countries. So the origin of products must be ascertained. Last week, we heard from Dave Jordan, the freight forwarder, and he told us that insurance value is usually CIF plus 10%. So that's a good rule of thumb to keep in mind. The bank draft are the instructions for the buyer's bank to pay, and they're common when using a letter of credit. There are a number of U.S. agencies that are involved in export controls. Now, I think we're used to thinking of US Customs as being helpful to the importer, but it's also very, very helpful to the exporter in that the things like the Bart Simpson bongs that you saw a minute ago, I can guarantee that those are a product of intellectual property infringement. So the Department of Commerce can be very, very useful to you in um, keeping out items from coming into the United States that are infringing on the intellectual property of an American company.